We all think we know the story of the Garden of Eden, right? But what if that map from Genesis isn't just about the past? What if it's actually a blueprint, a plan, for the very nations that would go on to shape our entire world? Let's take a closer look.
So, take a look at this. This is a classic depiction of Eden from the book of Genesis. You see the tree of life there in the center and those 4 rivers flowing out into the world. It seems pretty straightforward. But what if it's way more than just a map? What if this whole thing is a puzzle, maybe even a prophecy about the nations that would end up forging human history?
All right, to crack this puzzle, our first clue is right there in those 4 rivers flowing out of Eden. You see, each one is tied to a specific land, and believe me, that is not a coincidence.
I mean, just look at how specific the text is in Genesis 2. It tells us the Pishon River flows toward Havilah, this land of gold. The Tigris, that runs east of Ashur, which, you guessed it, became Assyria. The Euphrates is tied to the future land of Babylon. And then there's the Gihon, and it's directly connected to the land of Cush, an area we associate with ancient Ethiopia. See, these aren't just rivers, they're like giant signposts pointing to future civilizations.
Okay, let's zero in on that Gihon River for a second. The text explicitly says it flows through the land of Cush. That's a direct geographical link made right there at the very beginning of the biblical story. Now, you're going to want to remember the name Cush. It is absolutely key to this whole thing.
And then, of course, you've got the other big players on the world stage. The Tigris and Euphrates, the very lifeblood of Mesopotamia, are laid out right here on Eden's map. They literally point to the future locations of these massive empires, Assyria and Babylon. It's almost like the geography itself is predicting the future.
Okay, so the map shows us where these nations would be, but it doesn't really tell us when they showed up, right? If this thing is a blueprint, what's the timeline? And let me tell you, the answer might actually surprise you.
So let's dig into that timeline. Because when we actually look at the historical sequence described in Genesis, well, a really surprising picture starts to emerge about which of these civilizations was really considered the first nation.
So here's how the biblical timeline shakes out after the Great Flood. You have Noah and his sons, they survive. Then, in Genesis 10, the very first nation mentioned among their descendants is Cush from the line of Ham. It's only after that we get the whole story of the Tower of Babel, the event that scattered humanity and led to the founding of nations like Assyria and Babylon.
So, the big takeaway here, according to the biblical text, Cush is number 1. It's presented as the very first established nation in this new post-flood world, a direct line of continuity stretching all the way back to Noah's family.
So you see the contrast, right? Cush is positioned as the first nation, popping up immediately after the flood. But Assyria and Babylon, they show up later. They're born out of the rebellion and the scattering at the Tower of Babel. So you've got one that represents historical continuity, while the others represent this brand new, explosive chapter of human expansion and, well, rebellion.
And this, right here, is the absolute core insight. The map of Eden's rivers, it's not meant to be read like a history textbook, page by page. It's theological. It's a map of divine purpose.
So, what in the world does it mean to read this as a theological blueprint? Well, it means we're not just looking at a map, we're looking at a divine plan, where geography itself is being used to tell a much, much deeper story about history and destiny.
Basically, a theological blueprint is a symbolic map where the physical layout, the rivers, the land, is designed to prefigure, to foreshadow how history is going to play out. It's not just about places, it's about a message hidden right inside the geography itself.
It kind of works in 3 steps. First, you've got the divine geography that lays out the major players: Cush, Assyria, Babylon. Check. Second, the text gives us a prophetic order, putting Cush first in line. And third, that combination delivers this incredibly powerful theological message. There's a divine plan of continuity running straight through Cush that was established before other world powers rose up out of human division and rebellion.
So, okay, why does any of this matter? Well, it offers a totally new perspective on these ancient stories, right? It really changes how we see the connection between geography, history, and maybe a divine purpose.
So let's wrap this all up. The Genesis map of Eden, it can be read as a theological blueprint. It lays out the geography of future nations like Assyria, Babylon, and Cush. But, and this is the big but, biblically, Cush is presented as the first nation,
with a clear line of continuity from before the Tower of Babel. And what that suggests is that this map is less about historical dates and way more about a divinely prefigured order for the world.
And that leaves us with a pretty fascinating question, doesn't it? If the map of Eden holds this much depth, what other ancient texts or maps might be out there, just waiting to be read, not as simple history, but as theology? What else could we learn if we started looking at them, not just as records of the past, but as blueprints of a much deeper purpose?